Andrew, this new information you've got around the decision-making when it came to the lockdown, it was belated. Many thought that Gladys Berejiklian should have gone harder sooner. What happened in those crucial days, Andrew?
Yes, Kieran, finally Gladys Berejiklian acts in Sydney to impose a harsher lockdown, and Sky News can reveal that Prime Minister Scott Morrison was a key driver in advising the Premier to go harder on restrictions to attempt to quash the virus in Australia's biggest city. The Premier announced yesterday she was shutting all non-essential retail, just like the lockdowns which were so effective last year, but also shutting construction for the first time in Sydney in this pandemic. And she has banned workers from 3 local government areas in the southwest from leaving their areas for work, except in some circumstances which were exempted overnight, including supermarket workers. Well, why construction? Apparently there were cases spreading in those environments, and the modelling showed without this measure it would be difficult to get COVID-19 cases down. The fact construction was included did take the federal government by surprise and was one of the reasons Scott Morrison contacted bank bosses yesterday to ensure the support was there for people affected by lockdown. And in the New South Wales Cabinet Crisis Committee meeting, I understand Treasurer Dominic Perrottet and Ministers Stuart Ayres and Brad Hazzard argued against the construction closure, but were overruled by the Premier and Deputy Premier. Unlike the Northern Beaches, the subject of a lockdown in December, where there are a couple of roads in and out, it is impossible to police the Canterbury, Fairfield and Liverpool LGAs. So a lot of goodwill is needed here in terms of community participation for people not to leave their local area. Gladys Berejiklian was slow to lock down this latest outbreak after the air crew driver stuff-up and leak last month, and she was slow to go hard, as I sought to point out to her on Thursday. She needed some pressure from several quarters to act. When are you going to acknowledge it's time to lock it down harder to get rid of this thing?
The people of New South Wales know that our government has access to the best health experts in our nation.
It's not shifting. The numbers aren't shifting.
What is interesting to note about Delta variant is different to anything we've seen, and we know...
Best health advice has just got us a 5-week lockdown.
Had we not taken the action we did, we wouldn't be talking about 65 or 100 or 120 cases, we'd be talking thousands. And that is the difference. We took the action we did when we did to avert medical and health disaster.
You will see continual mentions of the health advice by Berejiklian as she justifies her decisions. It's been put to me that Kerry Chant, the Chief Health Officer, had told her in the lead-up to lockdown decision days of June 25 and June 26 that everything was under control, then suddenly said to lock down. A lot of conjecture as to whether Chant wanted Berejiklian to go harder earlier this week. Sydney is regarded by the federal government as the economic gateway to Australia. You've seen in recent days how concerned the Prime Minister Scott Morrison has been about what a protracted lockdown in Sydney means for the nation.
And the Commonwealth understands that we'll be continuing to support that for as long as the lockdown remains in place, and hopefully that won't be too long. I have no doubt that New South Wales will ensure it will only go as long as it have to, but it'll go for as long as it needs to.
And now we know Morrison came to the conclusion it was time to go hard. Berejiklian's tendency to revert to indecision has been cited by colleagues as a reason why she was reluctant to go the whole hog earlier. The reluctance of some in her cabinet has been seen as another reason. There's another view that she did not want to be seen to be following Victorian Premier Dan Andrews, and another view that the whole woman who saved Australia narrative was playing into her decision-making and that of her Chief Health Officer. And another view that polling around the time of the state budget, just before the lockdown, had shown the phrase safe and open worked with people in New South Wales, and that has been used repeatedly by the government, who did not want to contradict that image of being the state to open things up. Over the weekend, Berejiklian was even advised by Cabinet colleagues to set a 4-week date on the lockdown and just level with the public that Sydney was down past July 30. She did not do it yesterday. She is still maintaining that date as a targeted end to the lockdown. Few in Sydney believe a lockdown will end then. On July 23, In the federal parliament, the PM was actively praising Berejiklian for not locking down at that time.
I commend the New South Wales Premier for the way that she is handling the outbreak in New South Wales, the fact that she hasn't gone to lock down Australia's biggest city, but she has taken, I think, the very positive decision to keep Sydney open and to keep New South Wales open for its residents, Mr Speaker, and to continue to rely on what is Australia's best contact tracing system in New South Wales.
So a different point of view then. If Berejiklian had locked down on that day, Sydney would not be in the situation it is. That day, which was a Wednesday night, the 23rd, I heard from New South Wales government ministers that if the state were to lock down, it would occur on that Friday. At the time on social media, I posed the question, if that was their view, why not lock down now? And we know from the TikTok comedian who's getting the mail, John Bernard Carews, Kieran, that the case numbers today in New South Wales will be 105.
Yeah, interesting newsbreaker there on TikTok, a comedian, as you say.